Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee and Football right here on Online Texas Football. I'm your host, Blake Monroe, where I'm joined each and every morning by Bobby Burton and CJ Vogel. And guys, football season has officially come to a close. The final AP poll was released late last night. Texas comes in at number 3. Were you surprised by that ranking?
Not really. I mean, look, the only team that could have jumped them, I thought, was Georgia, right? And that was after they obliterated a Florida State team that was just clearly outmatched. But I'm not surprised by that at all. Washington deserved to end up being number 2. I thought Washington showed some pluck last night a little bit. They got back in the game exactly how they'd gotten back in so many games before. They kind of made a couple of big plays, but the Michigan defense guys, they got after Michael Penix, unlike Texas got after him, period. They were able to make him be on the run all night long. Just never could feel comfortable. They brought blitzes from everywhere. People were saying, oh, well, they only got to him with 4. That third and fourth quarter, they lit him up with blitzes coming from every which way. So, look, they definitely Michigan deserved the national title. Undefeated, beat an Alabama team that had gone on a roll and won the SEC, beat a Washington team that was undefeated at 14 or 15-0 as well. So my hat's off to the Wolverines. Now we'll see if they vacate their title in about a year or two, based on Jim Harbaugh constantly being having issues with the NCAA.
Well, one thing I want to bring up while we're on the subject of the AP poll, guys, and I did this morning. Number 3 ranked Texas played 6 teams in the final AP Top 25, beating 4 of them by a combined score of 156-89. The 2 losses, of course, were to both Washington and Oklahoma by a combined 10 points. So not a bad year.
No, it was a great year for Texas. I mean, I don't know what else you want to say. 12 wins. I mean, it's a great year. And you know what? I thought for a time, and CJ, I don't know if it ran through your head last night, but when Michigan got out to that big lead early, I was like, oh man, this could be Georgia versus TCU all over. But it didn't turn into that. And if it would have been Georgia versus TCU all over, Texas could have potentially lost some momentum, right? They could have lost some momentum on the recruiting trail. Oh, well, Texas didn't really belong, et cetera. But people watched that game. I mean, Washington was in it in the fourth quarter. It was 20-13. And so even though it ended up being 34-13, by the way, I picked 34-20, I believe, for Michigan to win that game. So I think of the 3 of us, I win that one, guys. Yep. But my take on it is that it didn't have any negative effect on Texas. If anything, it bolstered Michigan. So if Texas is going up against Michigan next year in some recruiting battles, don't think that won't play a role. But look, Texas, a great year, finishing number 3, beating several AP top 25 teams. I think the total was 5. They went 4-2, I think, against the AP top 25. The only 2 losses, Washington and Oklahoma. So do we get a bronze trophy? No, we do not get a bronze trophy, but I think that matches A&M's all-time high since, I don't know, 1939. In Steve Sarkisian's 3rd year. So not bad for the Longhorns.
No, not at all. All right, guys. Well, let's move on. Speaking of the Longhorns, let's talk about Longhorns that have declared for the draft. And there's been a couple since we were last on about 24 hours ago. What do y'all have there?
Say that again, Blake. I'm sorry.
No, you're good, Bobby. I said right now, we have a couple of Longhorns that have declared for the draft.
Okay, I'm sorry.
What can you tell people there?
You cut out there for a minute for me. Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Adonai Mitchell, he declared for the draft yesterday as expected. So did Jalen Ford. So did Keelan Robinson. That one went a little under the radar, I think, for some people. But obviously he's been a key cog in the machine of Jeff Banks and that special teams group for the Longhorns. With Mitchell, I think, Blake, the big piece for me is that just how much receiving yardage and catches the Longhorns now lose. They lose their top 4 receivers in Worthy, Whittington, and Mitchell, You actually lose your tight end. That's your top receiving tight end. And then they lose the fifth one as well, Blake. And they lose that is Jonathan Brooks. So their top 5 pass catchers are gone for next year. Their leading returning receiver is CJ Baxter with 24 catches. Jaden Blue had 14. Gunnar Helm had 14. The next highest receiver was Jonte Cook with 8. So if there's a position now that just went from a strength, like I rated the Texas receiving room the best group of the 2023 team on offense. I really believe that. They're going to go from that to now we got to replace a bunch of dudes, man, a bunch. And so this, portal recruiting becomes more important. Texas, CJ broke the news yesterday that Silas Bolin, a wide receiver out of Oregon State, will be making an official visit to Texas over the weekend. He's also got visits lined up to Arizona and Washington as well. He caught 54 balls. He's more of a Xavier Worthy type, CJ, but he's not even as tall as Xavier Worthy. He just has that acceleration. What do you think? What do you make, CJ, of Texas having to replace all these wide receivers?
Well, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, you talked about not only the production, but the talent, and obviously how impactful these guys were to the Texas offensive room in its entirety. It's a lot of mouths that will have, new food on their plate. There's a lot of guys that will have to step up, a lot of guys who, at least in the Texas ranks currently, haven't yet proven that they can be that reliable number 1 or number 2 or even that number 3 guy. You talked about Jonte Cook really being one of the leading returning receivers with only 8 career receptions. It's a lot of uncertainty. Texas didn't play Ryan Niblett. They didn't play DeAndre Moore a whole lot. Obviously, that whole group of fresh coming in as well. It's a very young group, so there's going to have to be a guy or two, a Ryan Wingo or, someone along those lines that takes that next leap. And we've seen, very clearly why Texas wants to go into the portal to grab an experienced guy with production. So it makes all the sense in the world right now for Sarkisian to go out and find veteran guys who he believes he can put trust into, because that's been the number one thing for Sarkisian and his receivers. You're not going to be on the field if he doesn't trust you and believe that you will be on the field to run the right routes, to make the right plays, to block the right guy, whatever it might be. That's a big part of Steve Sarkisian's offense. And so there has to be a guy or multiple guys that step up in spring football that earn that trust moving forward.
Let me ask you this. If we're spitballing right now, based on what you know, who are the 3 starters at wide receiver that Sark trots out there on game 1 against Colorado State on August 31st?
I know 2 for sure. And I think it goes into kind of the debate on whether or not who they add, where they add from the portal, whatever that might be. Otherwise, it might be Ryan Wingo. But right now, I believe Jonte Cook is penciled in. I believe Matthew Golden is penciled in. And funny enough, we actually had the conversation with Rod a little bit yesterday during Talking Ball. A big part of Texas's offense is the lateral, passing attack. It's the passes behind the line of scrimmage. 28% of Quinn Ewers' attempts came behind the line of scrimmage this year. Of the bodies that we just named, of the, kind of builds that they have, I don't know if there's a Jordan Whittington kind of alpha dog in the blocking scheme that Texas has for next year. There's not necessarily a guy with that physique, with that physicalness, with that, seemingly approach to want to block. I know it was a longer learning curve for A.D. Mitchell last year, despite being 6'2". Right now, Jonte Cook, not a big guy, not a guy with a lot of history of blocking. Matthew Golden, similar build, not a guy who you would expect to dominate in the pass blocking world as well. Silas Bolden's 5'8", 5'9". He's not going to be a guy that, you're going to be tasked with blocking a nickel or an outside linebacker or even a corner for that matter. So a lot of question marks. And so I'm looking at a guy like Ryan Wingo right now to say, hey, you've got to step up. You've got to find a way onto the field because Texas needs your body type out there. And 2, they could sure as hell use your production, or the promise of what your production could be. So that's kind of the big thing for me.
I would say this. I would add this on that. Texas gave away some things with Jordan Whittington in the slot a little bit. Whittington, while a really good player and a team leader and all these things, and likely has an NFL future ahead of him, is not the quickest slot. And so Texas gave away some stuff over the middle in the passing game because of his leadership, because of his blocking ability. And I think that Texas, unless they pick up another tight end in the portal, they're going to do a lot more 11 personnel probably next year, CJ, because, this past year you not only had JT Sanders, you also have Gunnar Helm. Now what's that tight end room going to look like next year? And so that's all to be found out. We got to figure out who, if any, Texas ends up with in the portal from the receiver perspective. CJ Daniels, the wide receiver that was in over the weekend, he is expected to make a decision here in the next week or so. Could be as soon as, whenever. He is the young man out of Liberty that's down to Auburn, Florida, and Texas. We believe that's really Auburn versus Texas at this point. However, I do want to update also the defensive tackle, Jamari Caldwell. I mentioned yesterday he was the number one defensive tackle in the portal. He is not. Walter Nolan out of Texas A&M is the number one defensive tackle in the portal. I was talking about the number one guy for the University of Texas. And so he is definitely the top prospect for Texas there. He was supposed to be, or he is expected to be on the cusp of a decision at this point. Texas versus Oregon is what I'm being told. 6'2", 315 pounds, a young man out of Newberry, South Carolina. Originally, I went to the University of Houston, spent the last 2 years there. We're waiting on his decision because I think that's going to be key. We've gone several minutes here without even mentioning CJ and Blake. The bigger piece of this, Jahdae Barron has yet to make his announcement as well. That could be any day now. He has till January 15th to make a decision. The one thing I would say that I've been told is Jahdae is wanting to perhaps come back and get a longer look and more reps at corner, not safety. CJ, you and I pontificated that he might be a better safety long-term. Well, he's actually thinking, I need to get some reps at corner to show my versatility to the NFL. This is, in fact, interesting because Barron has already accepted a Senior Bowl invite. And so him coming back would be a little bit of a surprise, but it's clear that he's trying to make a decision that could involve Texas right now. So we'll have to wait and see how that works out.
All right, guys, I want to go back to the receiver conversation for just a moment because we're getting lots of questions along those lines. And Ryan Niblett is a name that comes up quite a bit in these conversations, especially when talking about transfer receivers. For example, Chris Morris says, why can't we use the speed of Ryan Niblett? What are y'all hearing on him and how he's progressing and adjusting as he goes through his collegiate career?
Yeah, I think he just needs more reps. I think he needs more time. What I've been told is he is the fastest of the receiver group, but that's in a straight line right now. He needs to be faster on the field overall. And so he's got good hands. It's not his hands. He just has to get in and out of routes quicker, be less straight line and more dynamic out of the slot because they need people that can make people miss in a phone booth out of that position. That's really what Jordan Whittington didn't give Texas either that I was trying to explain earlier. They're looking for someone that can, make someone miss for an extra 4 yards to get a first down out of that position. That's typical of the slot. And so that's where Niblett as well as DeAndre Moore are part of that.
And then Drew M says, of the wide receivers we currently have, who is the 50-50 ball guy to replace A.D. Mitchell? Is there one?
It's going to have to be Ryan Wingo. There's not another big body on campus at the moment. If you look at the wide receiver body types of DeAndre Moore, Ryan Niblett, Jonte Cook, now even Matthew Golden, there's just not that kind of body in the wide receiver room at the moment. So whether or not the portal is that fix, if it's CJ Daniels, if it's somebody else, Texas will have to find out in the spring if, who that guy will be.
I want to – this is why going after Silas Bolden is interesting, or LeJontay Wester out of Florida Atlantic. They're very similar types, although Wester is more of a accomplished punt returner and a little bit bigger than Bolden. Those two guys are possibilities through the portal. So is a guy named Dorian Singer out of USC. that Johnny Nansen, the new linebackers coach, has some familiarity with, because Singer was at Arizona 2 years ago, caught more than 1,000 yards worth of passes, transferred to USC this past year, did not get used much. He would be a 50-50 ball catcher if you added him to the roster. I agree. And the other person I would add to that mix maybe for you, CJ, is Parker Livingstone. I mean, I know that he's not as highly rated as Ryan Wingo, but he is a downfield 50-50 guy with his length. That would be expected. Is he ready to go day one once he steps on campus? We'll see. That, by the way, it's less than 6 days when those guys show up now. It's today the 9th, is that right?
Yep.
Sure is.
Yeah, so it's 5 days. They show up on January 14th, ready to go.
Well, we're going to stay on the wide receiver conversation for a minute because this conversation is definitely driving in the chat. And Will B says, why do we keep going after these smaller receivers?
Touchdowns.
Speed.
Yeah. Go for it, CJ.
I mean, it's been a staple of Steve Sarkisian's offenses anywhere he's been. You know, you get playmakers, you get speed. Would you like them to be a little bit taller? Sure, but like anything, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And right now, Texas is getting a lot of speed with the receivers that they have on campus right now and the build that they're kind of seeking after. I know the 2023 wide receiver or 2024 receiver group is a little bit bigger than what we've come to expect and know from classes in the past, but it's all about speed. Like Bobby said, it's all about getting a guy the ball in space and letting him wiggle his way through the secondary and get, yards after the reception. I think you would rather take that than what Tom Herman's wide receivers would do, and that was just a big body possession catch. You're looking for 5 yards, you're going to get 5.5. I think you'd rather have the idea of a guy needing 5 yards, and the potential is he gets 64 or 65 or whatever it is. That's just how Sarkisian views his wide receivers, guys with dynamic playmaking ability, yards after catch ability, ability to hit the home runs, everything, all the cliche sayings about big time playmakers at the wide receiver position. That's what Sarkisian's getting at right there with the speed, and that I prefer it as well.
He is big, and Sark's offense is predicated on yards after catch. That's what CJ. I mean, so the quick passes to Jaden Blue in the flat, he doesn't use even a juke to get by the first guy. He uses his speed.
Well, yeah, Xavier Worthy against Michigan, or
right.
Wyoming.
Yeah, that's what he's using. It's yards after catch in large part. He definitely wants to throw deep. So don't get me wrong. That's part of Sark's offense. But underneath, that's what he wants. And you could add, you add speed. This was an anomaly this past year. Not only Freddie DeBose, but Parker Livingstone and Ryan Wingo, all big receivers. So it's not like Sark says, okay, I don't need any of those guys. I need one or two. What I remember is this. So when you start talking to all these big receivers, one of the things that was one of the funniest things I ever dealt with is Ed Orgeron, the former Ole Miss and LSU head coach. He came by the office one time, and I spent about 30 minutes with him. We did an in-person interview, took him around, all this other stuff. He was at USC with Steve Sarkisian back in the heyday, right, of USC, Pete Carroll's time. And he goes, look, we loved Mike Williams. I don't know if y'all remember the big-bodied receiver for USC.
Yep.
And we loved Dwayne Jarrett, another guy that played against Texas. And he goes, so we went and tried to find a bunch of those guys, because we thought these big-bodied receivers were all great. He goes, well, what happened to us in 3 years, we found out none of them could run. And so we ended up, we had this high-powered, high-octane offense with these jets going down the field, Steve Smith and those kind of guys going down the field. And we turned around and we ended up with a slow wide receiver group at USC, which just basically tore our offense apart. He goes, and so I want to say this. That's why Steve Sarkisian, when he takes big guys like Ryan Wingo or Parker Livingstone, make sure that they're having NFL caliber speed. Okay. So he's been down this road before and seen the outcome. Right. And so I think that's one of the reasons why speed trumps size at receiver almost every time. I mean, almost every time.
Look at Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Waddle. You can name the group. To your point, now not every receiver is going to have Tyreek Hill speed, obviously, but the point being, they got to create separation, and you can do it with either arm length or quickness or speed. It's hard to do it just solely with arm length. You have to do it with quickness and speed as much as anything.
All right, Joe, we have a super chat from Daniel Kinneman. And Daniel says, with the addition of 4 high school wide receivers and what appears to be 2 portal wide receivers, are we expecting more wide receiver attrition?
I wouldn't think so. Do you?
Sure
CJ Diblett or DeAndre Moore would be the only other 2 that I could think of. What do you think?
I was going to say, I'm not sure how many more receivers there are to, be in this conversation for attrition. Texas lost a lot. They lost, was it 5 guys basically to whether it be the portal or the NFL. So I don't know. I would think everybody would be in, if Ryan Nibbler or DeAndre Moore don't see themselves as fits with all these additions. I think that's more, I think that conversation would be better suited for after spring, after seeing where they stack up, because they committed to Texas for a reason. They like Steve Sarkisian. They like this offense. I'd like to see where they fit in a wide open wide receiver room before writing them out or expecting them to move on. And I hope they see the same as I do.
Brian Jones asks, will the focus going forward for Texas as far as wideouts go, will it be bigger size for the SEC transition? Seems like SEC wideouts have the go up and get it factor more than the Big 12. But before y'all answer that, I want to add this one from James Corns. He says, we talked about speed and I'm with you 100%, but what about the red zone? Could this be where our struggles come from? Our best red zone threats were Sweat and Murphy.
So there's an element of truth to that red zone thing, but I think actually the red zone issue is more Sark's willingness to put Quinn in quick decision-making scenarios in the red zone. That's one of the areas that Quinn has to improve on, and Sark has to coach him on, and put him in those tight windows that aren't just RPOs. I mean, how many red zone TD throws did Quinn have that weren't RPOs? There weren't many. Okay, so that's going to be something that I think Quinn and Steve Sarkisian work on. As far as this, the thing with the SEC is size and speed combined are better, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-size. I think Ryan Wingo and Parker Livingstone have SEC size, but they also have SEC speed. That's the big piece that people have to recognize. The SEC, you're fine if you have a 6 foot tall or 6'1" or 6'2" receiver, as long as he runs 4.5. He can't run a 4.65, or if he does, you can only have one of those. You can't have 2 or 3. Yeah, that's the piece of it that we have to be aware of.
Okay, guys, we're gonna move on here. Let's do this super chat from Brian Hudson. Who's gonna be the punt returner / kick returner next year?
Woo! I don't know that it's decided about the punt returner yet. What do you think, CJ?
Yeah, I remember early in August when media was able to go check out practices. Jonte Cook was receiving punt returns. DeAndre Moore was in that conversation. Not as much Ryan Niblett as you might expect with his speed, but he was in the conversation a little bit. I really liked what I saw from Jaden Blue returning kicks, in the Sugar Bowl. I thought he had a little burst to him. We obviously know what the speed is like. Will they entrust a running back 2 or potentially even 1 to be that main kick returning guy? I hope so, because he's a great playmaker. So I think that's where they'll lean right now. But yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the punt returning game, that's a lot to make up for with the departure of Xavier Worthy. That needs to be a dynamic playmaker. And I think Texas has those pieces right now in their wide receiving. It's just about putting it on the field and obviously making the steps to duplicate it.
Yeah, you got to think Matthew Golden is your kicker returner. You got to think that he's part A. I mean, he averaged 35 yards a kick return. But you add him with Jaden Blue, and all of a sudden you can't kick right or left per se. Savion Red was back there with Jaden Blue. He was kind of the lead blocker at times in that alignment. So be aware of that. I think that was a big one. But my take on it is really kind of this. I think that the kick return is taken care of with Golden and or Blue. I think the punt return is up for grabs. And I will say this: if they take LeJohntay Wester out of Florida Atlantic, punt return's taken care of. So be on the lookout for him as well. He is a fantastic punt return.
Okay, guys. Well, I think our special guest is here this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and add him in here, Coach Bob Shipley. And Coach Shipley, how you doing this morning?
Hey, doing great. How y'all doing this morning?
Hook 'em, Coach.
Hey, baby.
You saw that game last night just like we all did. What were your immediate thoughts coming out of that game with Michigan and Washington? Just want to hear what you had to think.
Well, I think it's obvious that Michigan's a more physical team. We all kind of knew that going in, whether Washington's finesse was going to be able to, handle that. I just thought Michigan's defensive game plan was brilliant. They disguised their coverages. They mixed up their coverages. They were running some 3 deep secondaries, some cover 3 at times, which will help, obviously eliminate those deep balls. And then they were getting good pressure on them. They were giving him a bunch of looks up front and getting pressure on him. He had to get rid of the ball. So, it was a while into the game before he took a deep shot, and that's kind of been their bread and butter. So, and then when he did take deep shots, we had 2 deep safeties that were able to, take a good angle and be able to bat the ball down, So I thought the defensive game plan was brilliant. I thought they were more physical. I thought their secondary did a great job. I didn't realize that their Michigan's defense was rated the way that they were and were as dominant as they were. I think, defensively that was my thoughts with Michigan. Offensively, obviously, we kind of had some hindsight last week about running the football, but they definitely, I think, had some good. Of course, the running back was unbelievable. I thought he played a great game, but still, they did a really good job of, taking advantage of some things that Washington wasn't doing real well, a la, fitting on the run. So it was pretty amazing when you had holes that wide open. I think I could have run through a couple of those, at least for 3 or 4 yards.
that was interesting. It seemed like Washington adapted on defense in the middle part of the game, got a key stop there to make it only, I think, 17-3 instead of going up 21-3. And then the game kind of turned into this little defense back and forth where Washington just basically said, okay, if J.J. McCarthy beats me by throwing, then that's what's going to happen. We're not going to sit back and just let this guy run all over us. Right. But at the end of the day, I'm with you. I mean, CJ, what do you think that Michigan's defense was just overwhelming? I mean, it looked like Penix had no time at all.
I did. I thought coming into the game, they were ranked number 1 in the country in points per possession allowed defensively. I thought that stood out to last night, obviously against Washington. Coach, to your point, they took away the deep pass. Washington did not attempt many deep throws at all, and when they did, it wasn't a great throwing night from Penix. Do you think that, in your eyes, was there a too late of an approach in the game for Penix and the board to go deep? Was it already in Penix's mind that he was going to get pressured, get hit as a result?
I think when you see when you're getting pressured and then the defense has, 3 guys deep. In other words, those 3 guys are all 3 coached. Don't let anybody behind you. He's not going to have a guy, running a step ahead of a corner and just where you could just throw a rainbow. Well, he doesn't throw rainbows, but just, throw it right in without having to worry about a safety coming over the top. And I think that really got him out of his rhythm. We saw last week when we played him that he does a good job throwing the ball on the run. It's not that, it's not that he didn't have time to set up and throw. He was making throws on the run against us that were just unbelievable. And obviously he was in the zone against us. He had an incredible night, but I think Michigan disrupted him a lot, able to get pressure on him, he had to get rid of the ball so quick. He was just zinging it out and in fact, most quarterbacks probably wouldn't have been able to get rid of the ball on several of those passes because, he just has such a quick release that he's able to zing it across, and get rid of it and still complete some of them, although they were, short passes and, you expect your backs, and they did break one for a big first down, one tackle for a big first down, but typically, they were giving him the short stuff and taking away the deep stuff, and I know that's, offensively, when you're used to doing that, that's frustrating. You're taking away my favorite thing to do, and so now you're making me do something I don't want to do, and they were still able to get the pressure on him so that he couldn't even throw the short to middle without being harassed. So, yeah, it was crazy game.
This, Coach. You said it was a brilliant defensive game plan. Do you think Texas had the personnel Texas doesn't look like it has the personnel that Michigan has?
That's a really good point, and I do think obviously Michigan was, I think, the number one pass defense in the country. So yeah, obviously personnel had a lot to do with that. But excuse me, I'm not sure why we didn't go, with more. I don't know about cover three, 3 deep is something that you don't just throw out there. Never having seen it or done it before in 1 week to get ready for a national championship game or a semifinal game. But I do think there's some things that we could have done better over the top. But I think you're probably right. I think we did what we felt like we could do with our personnel, which was not on the same level as Michigan.
What were your thoughts overall on Michael Penix? Still think he's a whale of a quarterback. Just was pressured so much yesterday. You have any negative thoughts coming out of that game about Texas based on how they played, or just that Texas has further to go maybe on some things?
Yeah, I think we're Texas is more like Michigan, more like Washington than we are like Michigan. Michigan is just an overall very sound team. I mean, I don't. Where's their weakness? I don't know where it is, and we're not there yet. So I think I'd like to see us get a little, obviously, like we all would. We're gonna do better in the secondary next year, but still, just overall, the physicality and the speed that they had, and I mean, when they're back, when they broke through, they were gone. Washington didn't have anybody to catch them. So, yeah, I don't think we're where we need to be recruiting yet, the level of athlete that we have to to be able to win those kind of games last night. But we're certainly so far from where we were and getting closer every recruiting class, to being able to compete with the Michigans and the Ohio States and those people on any given weekend.
I think back to it, and I was told that going into this game, like actually 2 weeks ago, as Texas was preparing for Washington and all this stuff, I was told that the only weak spot on Michigan's team was wide receiver. They didn't have that one wide receiver. Like the thought was, imagine their team with Xavier Worthy at wide receiver right now, and you pretty much have a team that has a legit big time player at just about every position. Steve Sarkisian, he was asked in the preseason, because Jim Harbaugh has been famously very strong about this team. He said that he thinks he has as many as 20 NFL draft picks that are going pro this year.
Oh my goodness.
I know. And so that gives you guys a feel for the kind of physicality that Texas would have been facing. But my take on it, in give me your feel on this too, coaches. Look, Texas has to be what Texas can be when it has the pieces of the puzzle. And so where they're at 2 years from now, are they going to be more physical? Well, yes, their offensive line is getting more physical. They're getting to that level. If Texas would have just lined it up and ran like they tried to do against, or like Michigan tried to do against Washington would have done the same thing that they did against Michigan and tried to make Quinn Ewers beat them. I feel like, you got to try to. It's football is a game. It's a game. It's a game of strategy, a game of execution. There's no, hey, let's just run the ball and we'll win.
Yeah, right.
It's more complicated than that because of all the emotions that I heard coming out of the Texas-Washington game is Sark should have just ran the ball down their throat, right? Well, that doesn't always just work. I mean, Michigan showed that because they tried to do that. And until they mixed in the passing game to the tight end, they got kind of flummoxed on that. Explain that thought process because it's not as simple as, hey, just run the ball.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, our coaches were obviously trying to get together a game plan that fit our personnel. You can come up with some great schemes to be able to, do, but if you don't have the guys to carry it out, it kind of reminds me of, after we lost to Alabama in the national championship in the Rose Bowl, Mac seemed enamored with the big SEC running game and these, and so all of a sudden, he wants to, have that power running game. I think he felt, I don't know. He just felt like that was the way of the future. And so we took the offensive linemen that had been taught to retreat, every snap to pass block. And obviously in Texas, there's so many people that are throwing the ball. You get guys that don't have a background of coming off the ball with a flat back and blowing people off the line. They're protecting the air raid or whatever people are running in high school. There's so many different combinations now. And so you can't do that. Obviously, we failed miserably. It wound up costing, Greg Davis's job and ultimately I think Mac his job. We were lost in that process of trying to be something that we weren't. You have to recruit to it and get to it. And I don't know that like I said, the linemen in the state of Texas that you recruit, most of them aren't, they don't spend a lot of time under a cage coming off with a flat back and, doing all those things. But I think our staff did, what they felt like our kids, and they know better than anybody, obviously, the limitations and the strengths of our players and how they can fit into that scheme. And at some point you just kind of roll the dice and say, okay, well, I mean, this is what we got. And, and if Penix hadn't been throwing so accurately, obviously a week ago, it would have been, hey, great game plan, but
Absolutely.
We didn't quite get the pressure on them that we needed.
Yeah.
Coach, I ask this next question because Texas does go to Michigan next year, week 2 to start off the year. We obviously just talked about how Michigan's maybe number one hole on their roster was that, dominant wide receiver. Texas going to have to rebuild, reshape, retool the roster as we know it from the year ago, obviously. Michigan will have some departures as well. But is there a spot that you see Texas needing to make probably a larger jump than most on the roster right now to contend and compete and potentially defeat Michigan whenever they head to the Big House next fall?
Well, I think offensively, of course, we need to continue to bring those young guys along on the offensive line. I've heard you say many times, Bobby, and I really think that there's so much truth to the depth and the level that those guys we have now that we didn't have before. If we had a guy get hurt, I mean, it was a huge drop off, Now we've got a lot of Sunday type players, I think, in that room. So I think we need to continue to develop those guys. Offensively, my biggest question, is going to be obviously, as you all know, replacing our receivers and having that threat because you get used to that, and next year if we don't have that, that deep threat guy or somebody that can really stretch the field, then we're going to have to rely on the running game more. And I don't know that is what, I don't know that's Sark's wheelhouse. I mean, obviously he likes to run the ball, but he sure likes to sling it down the field But I think, the way the transfer portal is now and everything's so crazy, who knows what next year's Michigan team is going to look like? Who knows what the Texas team is going to look like?
Exactly.
I mean, you take 20 guys, off of that roster in Michigan, and you got a whole different team now. I'm sure they've been recruiting obviously at a high level, and they'll, just like we're hoping our younger guys and our transfers will fit in. Well, they're doing the very same thing. But it'll be an intriguing matchup, especially if we can get the receivers in. That's the key offensively. And defensively is no secret. On the back end, we've got to get better and be better, and for us to have a chance to go up there and compete next fall.
Bob, the other thing I was going to ask you, as it relates to replacing those receivers, look, 217 catches between the top 4 receivers, including JT Sanders. They actually lose the top 5 pass catchers from this year because Jonathan Brooks was a leading pass catching running back with 25 catches. That is a lot of production. And both of your kids played receiver, right? at Texas. I mean, what is that gonna? I mean, what should we even expect? Do we not know what to expect? I mean, yes, they're bringing in a Matthew Golden, and Jonte Cook looks like he's ready. But man, this is going to just be a whole different crew with a different set of strengths and weaknesses. And you lose a team leader like Jordan Whittington out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's huge. It's huge, and just because we've had a little success the last couple of years with those guys, don't think it's going to be automatic with this just next the next man up. I've said this before. I look for Quinn and those guys to really spend a lot of time with those new guys this winter and this spring and this summer. It'll be just, obviously our coaches will have that set up as well, but that's going to be key to how well those guys, first of all, are they just going to, do they have the athletic ability that these last guys had? And if they do, can we get them in the system and teach them the nuances? Because, it's not, the old days, it's like, okay, well, I've got a go route on this. No, I've got a post or whatever. It's not like that anymore. It's really not. It's a lot of the routes depend on the coverage, and you'll see quarterbacks all the time and receivers, throw a ball, there's nobody there. Well, okay, they were on the wrong page. Well, how can they be on the wrong page? You're thinking, you've got a route. Well, no, those routes change. And so being able to get guys on the same level. I remember a time when I think 2008 season, Texas was playing Arkansas in Austin. And I saw Jordan ran a go route, and Colt was, I don't remember if it was a drop back. I think it was a sprint out to that side. And at the last second, it looked like, he was just going to throw a fade. And then Colt just threw a dart to Jordan's outside shoulder. And Jordan turned to the outside and caught it right on the line. It was touchdown. And I said, hey, what do y'all call that play? And he said, well, it's just this. And I go, yeah, but how did you know? I mean, what's the call when he's going to throw it, outside like that, when it looks like you're running a fade? He goes, that's no call. It's no call. And I said, well, how do you do it? I'm trying to get that on my high school team, And he said, I can tell by the angle of Colt's shoulders whether he was going to throw the deep ball. If his shoulders are pitched up a little bit, I know he's going to throw it deep. If his shoulders were down, I knew he was going to throw it hard into the outside. And so he could just tell by the way Colt was set up throwing it whether it was going to be a fade or he was going to throw it to his outside shoulder. And that's what it takes. And they didn't just draw that up that day. I mean, it's something they did months and months and months and months. And Quan was the same way. Quan they'd make some unbelievable plays, and they just knew each other so well. And that's what these guys got to do. They've got to get in the film room. They've got to get in the indoor or wherever they can get and just rep and try to get some rapport and try to figure each other out, what they're thinking, and get a good mix of guys who's going to fit in which receiver spot, and it's not just, well, I'm gonna put my fastest guy at X. No, maybe not. It just depends on what they're able to do. So It's those guys spending the time with the quarterbacks and the coaches putting all those guys in the right position to help them run the system that they want to run.
Coach, just great stuff there. And I can see that play happening. The way you described it, I can see that play happening in my mind. You know what I mean? It's like that's what football is all about. It's why it's, in my opinion, the best sport there is. All right, that's Bob Shipley. Coach, thank you so much for joining us today, bud. We'll see.
Hey, my pleasure. Always enjoy it.
All right, we'll see you on Thursday night on Football
Thank you, Coach.
Rod Babers.
All right, hook 'em, guys.
What a good guy, good rep at the University of Texas. His sons were just tremendous players, tremendous ambassadors to the University of Texas as well. What a fountain of information there, Blake. What do you think?
Yeah, that was an awesome story. that was an awesome story there, for sure. All right, guys, we got a super chat that we're going to jump over to real quick. Dax Kelm, he says, what's the holdup on Ewers announcing? Is it NIL negotiating?
No, it is not. It's actually something else that will become apparent when he announces. That's all I'm going to say at this point. So be aware of that. I fully expect him to still return to school. I mentioned at one point it was 90%, then 95%. I'm at 98.5 to 99% now. It would take something major to change that mind. By the way, not only he, but Jahdae Barron, their drop dead date for the NFL draft is January 15th. So it's 6 days from today. It's 1 week from Monday. So that's where it's at. We'll know something for sure by then on those two guys.
All right. Well, you're watching Coffee and Football right here on Texas Football. Plenty of time to get your questions in, so please do just that. But before we move on, fellas, I need to tell everybody out there about Manscaped. And cheers to the new year from our friends at Manscaped, because your resolutions shouldn't be the only things that are well kept. 2024 is the time for new heights, new opportunities, and a new look for your Times Square balls. Manscaped's Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is every man's cheat code to look good, feel good, and turn the page on confidence this year. Whether you're looking to maintain a trim or go for that clean shaven look, this trimmer has you covered. It's trusted by over 10 million men worldwide, and now is your time to get a grip on your grooming with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com, use code ONTEXAS, and they're going to give you 20% off plus free shipping. Happy New Year or Happy New Balls. And introducing the MVP of 2024, Manscaped's 5th generation lawnmower. It's not just a trimmer, it's your grooming sidekick. It's equipped with 2 skin-safe blade heads, a standard one for taking a little off the top, and a new foil blade to go smooth wherever your heart desires. It's like having a personal stylist at your fingertips or, well, wherever you need it. And did I mention it's waterproof, because the trim in the shower is the only way to start your day. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code ONTEXAS at manscaped.com, because nothing says Happy New Year like a deal that leaves your balls and your budget feeling refreshed. Embrace a new you, and definitely embrace a new trimmer courtesy of Manscaped.
Better you than me. Better you than me reading that.
I about got it memorized at this point. So
we need CJ to do that. He's more that age, I think.
I'll put on a show.
Oh.
And Bobby winces uncomfortably. All right, Bobby, we're going to get back to football for your sake. Right here on Texas Football. Triplet Joseph 44 has a super chat. And he says, who's a better wide receiver, CJ Daniels or Isaiah Nayor?
You know, I want to say this, and I'm not Nayor got in the doghouse for whatever reason after he came back. He just never broke. Who calls it Rod calls it the circle of trust that Steve Sarkisian had at receiver. And if you don't enter the circle of trust, you don't get much playing time. Well, Isaiah Nayor didn't enter the circle of trust after he returned. It wasn't all about his knee not being 100%. Some of that was he didn't run the right routes. He didn't practice hard, or I don't know the exact. I'm just throwing stuff out there a little bit. I don't know all of the reasons why. I know that he just did not enter the circle of trust. At the end of the year, Texas trusted Jonte Cook more than they did Isaiah Nayor. Nayor, by the way, is now transferring to Nebraska. So it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do up there. Only thing I would add, Blake and CJ, to this is I don't know who's better. Like, I know that CJ Daniels, though, is on a trajectory to be a good receiver, a reliable receiver, 55 catches, et cetera. He was the number one receiver for, there's a piece there that all makes sense. And so whether it's CJ Daniels, Silas Bolden, who we mentioned earlier, who's making an official visit to Texas, we believe, this weekend, or is wanting to, or LeJontay Wester, or, even Dorian Singer, whoever it is that they come up with out of the portal, they're looking for production coming in. So that's one of the things that I think that Steve Sarkisian has really talked about. He needs some people that are proven and know where to go, what to do, how to be, et cetera.
Hey, here's a good question. I'm curious to get y'all's input on this. Adam said, and this is going back to what Coach Shipley said a second ago, does that type of relationship still exist in the portal area? Colt, Ship, and Quan spent years together. These years, players may only interact for 1 year. Would you love your thoughts? What do y'all think about that?
I think it exists.
It's still there, just not as much.
Yeah, I think it exists. I think the question is, they don't always have to be like, it doesn't always have to be with just one quarterback and one receiver. Like, the receiver can work on his own skills with a different quarterback as well, and just translate the nuances from one to another. Like, he was talking about the front shoulder of Colt being down meant he was going to drive the ball. The front shoulder being up meant he was going to throw it with some arc, right? That's you can see other similarities. Well, maybe Arch does this versus Quinn doing this. And it's the same kind of thing that the receiver has to do to accommodate for, with just different motions. But certainly the 3 or 4 year starter at quarterback with the 3 or 4 year starter at wide receiver is certainly something that doesn't happen very often anymore. And I think it is, to CJ's point, it doesn't happen as often. We're in a different time of college football right now.
We've had lots of questions regarding Savion Red, especially after our wide receiver conversation earlier. So let's do one of these. Kyle Fowler says, could Red turn into that do anything for Texas guy like Jordan Whittington was and move back to some wide receiver?
I mean, he could. He did not move there during Sugar Bowl practice. Now, granted, that was because they were still in season, but moving Jelani McDonald to safety was done during Sugar Bowl practice. What are your thoughts there, CJ?
Well, I think to that point, Texas didn't necessarily lose 4 or 5 guys at the wide receiver position at a depth necessity, in which I, kind of expected Jelani McDonald to move back there as a result of. For Savion, who moved from receiver to running back, who's carved out a pretty niche role for himself in that kind of wildcat, kind of deal, whatever you might call it, the red cat, whatever it is. That running back room is pretty crowded. If there is a path to the field, it is kind of in that slot kind of bully wide receiver role that we saw Jay Witt in at times this year, in terms of being that lead blocker, being that guy to go out and take on a linebacker or safety to lead the way for whoever is behind them with the football. It would make sense on paper because there's not a physically kind of intimidating wide receiver on the roster at the moment that we know of. That's the biggest key right now. We don't know just yet who will step up and take that step physically that we've seen from a Jordan Whittington over the last couple of years. So it would make sense in theory, but again, it would have to make sense if the numbers add up on both positions. Texas feels very comfortable. Jarrett Gibson, Christian Clark coming in as well. Just how everything shapes up at the wide receiver and running back position once spring ball arrives. It would certainly help. The Swiss Army knife that is Savion Red. Let him do a million things, and I would be for it.
All right, guys. Well, we have had a lot of people join since we first started the show. Over 1,000 watching right now on Coffee and Football. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. So let's reset here and go back over the news that we opened the show with, Bobby. And we will lead with Texas, of course, being ranked number 3 in the final AP poll.
Yep, absolutely. I think it's big. Texas finishes 3 behind Michigan and Washington. Georgia, the only one I thought could have leapfrogged, right? Look at Florida State staying at 7, by the way. What do y'all think about that? Like CJ, Blake, their performance in the Orange Bowl was bad, but it was also their 3rd string, right? So that's an interesting ranking for Florida State, in my opinion.
I don't know what to do.
I'm a little surprised by Florida State staying at 7, but at the same time, I'm kind of even more surprised Georgia jumped up to 4. Did Alabama not just take Michigan to overtime? Did I miss that game being as close as it was? So I don't know. If you put stock in, that Georgia Florida State game, I understand it, but Alabama played Michigan probably as well as anybody else this entire season. So I kind of disagree with that 4 and 5 flip.
See, I'm under the impression that you can put Georgia. I think it's fair to even rank them all the way up to number 3. I really do. I mean, you got to look at the whole body of work, how they played all the way down to the bowl game, as you said, Bobby, against 3rd string. But they were impressive all season, and then obviously lost in the SEC championship. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yep. Other news that broke yesterday, Adonai Mitchell announces for the NFL draft as expected. We had been thinking that was going to be the case. Jalen Ford officially announced as well. We already knew I think he's in Phoenix right now, actually working out already. He had already made the move to Phoenix to start working out on Monday. So that official news came out as well. And then one that kind of slipped under the radar, as we mentioned, Keelan Robinson going pro as well. Is he expected to be drafted? Most likely not. If he makes a team, it's going to be as a backup running back, kind of a boutique running back, as well as a special teams zealot, whether that's returning kicks, being a gunner, etc. He will be one of those types of guys for Texas to look at. Waiting on still the decision of Jahdae Barron, the star on the Texas defense, plays that nickelback position. He is wanting to look more and more at playing cornerback next year and get some reps there. That would be interesting because we had always thought maybe he might be a better safety, but it's actually his versatility at corner that he wants to try to highlight for NFL scouts for next year if he were to return. Now, this is all a big deal because if he returns, the Texas secondary immediately looks significantly better next year than it did this year. Because not only is Barron coming back, but they also have a 3-year starter from Clemson named Andrew Makuba, 2 starting corners return in Manny Muhammad and Terrence Brooks. Michael Taffet comes back. Derek Williams, the safety out of New Orleans area, returns as well. That goes from a potential, I thought at times it was a liability this year. It goes to a potential team strength in a single year. That's, If Barron returns, I would be comfortable saying it goes to being a team strength next year.
All right, y'all. Well, let's move on to some super chats because we have a lot of them to get to. And we're going to start with this one from Darkboard, who just put this in. Thank you, Darkboard. He says, have the secondary players been unfairly criticized for coaching deficiencies? Or secondaries were never as much of a liability under Akina? Or I think he meant our secondaries were never as much of a liability under Akina through 5 different defensive coordinators. Was the talent never this deficient?
I talked to Dwayne Akina about a week ago, just for the record. The 2006 defense for Texas, the secondary was deficient. After you lost, or 2007, can't remember when Dwayne was the defense coordinator for a year. But there were some secondary liabilities there. And liabilities isn't the right word, but deficiencies is better. So it wasn't always perfect back there. It helps when, you had a run of, if you ever started at cornerback for Texas for 10 years, you were in the NFL draft, by the way. There was a reason why it was called DBU. And you had safeties like Michael Griffin and Michael Huff followed by guys like Kenny Vaccaro down the line, Earl Thomas, etc. I don't think it was coaching. I really don't. I've talked about that. The one thing that did get changed on coaching, and I think Sark forced the hand on this, was playing more bump and run at the line of scrimmage and challenging players more. Texas was reticent to do that. Terry Joseph doesn't like to really put his corners in that kind of danger. But I think Steve Sarkisian said, look, we got to roll the dice a little bit more, and not just play safe. And I think Texas did that and was largely rewarded for it in 2 of the 3 games where they really decided to go out and do that.
All right. This next super chat, fellas, is from Mr. All I Do Is Win. And he says Washington got that same treatment from the refs that we got. What do y'all think about that?
The pre-snaps were there. The pre-snap penalties were there for both teams, really. I don't know. I saw a lot of still graphics and still photos of the Michigan offensive line with a handful of jersey a few times. So I guess that was where that comment was going, because that's, kind of been the Texas kind of cry for help the entire season. Is there's a defensive line duo that's amongst the best in the entire country who didn't get a single holding call the entire year, which I 100%, agree with and can see the argument for. So I get that 100%. That makes sense to me.
I thought that they didn't. And there was one that below the waist call where a Michigan player shot in underneath the offensive lineman, and they didn't call it an undercut because he actually went through it. Look, I thought it was reasonably officiated. I thought that the problem with holding right now is it's unevenly called, and it's not even the pass interference that's unevenly called. Pass interference is just whatever they see. Holding is just so unevenly called in the college game. It's ridiculous. That is if I had, and this is the biggest piece of it all too. I've said this. They used to, I could almost understand it because there was only one ref behind the line of scrimmage looking for holding. Now they have 2, and they're still missing them by and large. That's my problem with the refereeing at the college level. Just the inequity of holding calls. If it's not egregious, they're not calling it. Or if somebody happens to see one little thing, they are. It's really odd. And I'd love to get an official on to try to tell me what they need to do better, because they're obviously missing some. So how do they rectify this problem? Because putting another ref behind the line of scrimmage wasn't the answer. So what is? That's my question.
It's a tough job.
Yeah, no, it's a tough job. I mean, I agree. Tough job, but something has to change.
Yeah. All right, y'all, we have a few more super chats here. This first one from David, and he says, this year penalties were a problem, masked by the wins, but we seem to lack discipline throughout the year. We have to improve here. We slammed Tom Herman for not getting this addressed. What do y'all think?
To an extent, I wouldn't say necessarily Texas was bedridden by penalties. There were times where the penalties were a lot. Obviously, pre-snap, shift penalties, formation penalties, those add up. Those are kind of nuanced. But, more times than not, that's a look your guy in the eyes and just say, yo, come on. That's not a guy that's consistently holding. That's not a defensive back that's just consistently grabbing. In my eyes, it's a mental thing in which Texas can and will resolve with another year of these guys in the system. I would be shocked if we walked into 2024 and saw as many pre-snap penalties as Texas did, despite going into a tougher environments in the SEC, louder crowds, bigger, hostile, whatever you might call it. But what we saw this year, I would say, was a little bit more uncharacteristic of guys just being a little too eager at times.
I don't think Texas is undisciplined overall. They can be undisciplined just like any team can. But I didn't feel like it was habitual. I thought that the pre-snap, the only penalties that were habitual, in my opinion, were pre-snap too much. And a lot of that, I mean, frankly, is Sark's proclivity to do a lot of pre-snap motion. You know, it makes those offensive linemen sit there on their heels a while going through all of that. And so there's some element to that, but I never felt like Texas was undisciplined. I would everything else I about what the super chat said, I agree with, except for the use of the term undisciplined. I think that's a little, you know, I thought penalties tended to be more uncharacteristic than undisciplined. That would be my comment.
We're going to combine these next two super chats because they're about the same subject here. Brandon Huey says, did y'all see ESPN has this number 2 in their college football prediction for 24? And then Sean Rave says, Texas projected at number 2 in next year's too early top 25 poll, of course, by ESPN. I know Michigan loses like 19 starters off this year's team. What are y'all's expectations?
I would be highly surprised if Texas ends up number 2 in the country next year, guys. Like I'm a big believer in where Steve Sarkisian's taking this team, but I don't. CJ, you got to do the stats on this. How many starts does Texas lose with these players? A.D. Mitchell, Jalen Ford, Keaton Crawford, Jaron Thompson, Christian Jones, Byron Murphy, Tavondre Sweat, Ryan Watts, Jordan Whittington, Xavier Worthy, J.T. Sanders, Jonathan Brooks, and Ryan Sanborn. That is a mouthful of starts and a mouthful of players. Texas, yes, the one thing about Texas compared to a lot of schools is they have some young guys ready to roll, we think, filling those roles. But, I mean, come on. I mean, thinking that they're going to go up to number 2 in the country. Yes, I think Texas has the most important position on the field coming back next year. But number 2 in the country is a little rich for my blood right now with this Texas team.
I will say real quick, I'm going to interject here that Brad Crawford also released a early top 25. He also has Texas number 2. So go ahead.
What do you think, CJ? I mean, I can be the resident pessimist. Fair story. I understand that. What do you think for next year? Like, are you thinking 11 wins, or are you thinking more like 9 or 10? I mean, what is your number right now?
I mean, it'll be fun whenever the season gets closer to dive through the schedule and kind of where things are favorable. I know Texas playing Georgia and Oklahoma back-to-back weeks isn't going to bode well for, you know, the overall big picture record-wise. But to your point, Bobby, I'm looking at the transfers. I think it's up to 13 transfers out. 7 declarations for the NFL. This doesn't include Jordan Whittington and Christian Jones as well, but that's 209 career starts. I just did the mental math there. I won an award back in middle school for mental math, so we're gonna trust that one there. But 209 career starts, not including Jordan Whittington, a 5th-year starter, and Christian Jones, a 5th-year starter, or the punter. So a lot is what's going to have to be replaced. To your point, I think Texas is returning a lot of pieces at a lot of important positions, the offensive line specifically, the defensive ends specifically, and cornerbacks. And so that is encouraging to me. Where Texas has to find pieces, and it's almost flipped on both sides of the ball, is in the middle on the defensive side of the ball, your middle linebacker and your defensive tackles. Obviously, safety is kind of a question mark, or it's in kind of limbo at the moment. And then who are going to be your playmakers out wide on offense? We don't know. You talked about how many receptions, how many targets, how many yards that is up in the air from a year ago. We're going to have a better idea of this after spring football when we start hearing practice reports of, well, we know we have a guy in Ryan Wingo, or we really think Jonte Cook is that, you know, Xavier Worthy incarnate. You know, we just don't know right now. With the way the schedule shapes up, going to Michigan, going to Fayetteville, going to College Station, those are 3 games where, you know, there's no guaranteed Texas is winning any of those games. You know, I hate to admit it. That's all 3 are very tough places to play where fans certainly don't want to lose to Texas. So that's kind of, you know, you just kind of have to wait and see. But I do think 9 wins is realistic. 10, I certainly could see Texas winning 10, but anything above that right now, I would be kind of hard-pressed to saying, yeah, that's on the table for next year.
Well, Georgia's going to be – if Georgia isn't the preseason favorite, I don't know what to tell you.
Correct.
I'll put it that way. It'll be interesting, too, if Michigan's J.J. McCarthy comes back next year. A lot of people think he's going pro, but after that performance last night, he didn't look very pro-worthy or pro-ready to me. Not more so than Quinn Ewers for sure. So
I'm with you.
Okay, guys, we have another super chat that we need to knock out before we get out of here. And this one from Football Junkie. He says, do we have any potential all SEC guys next season? How do some of our top guys compare to the top guys in the SEC at their positions?
Well, here's one, Quinn Ewers.
No.
I mean, if you want to talk about quarterbacks consistently taking that leap from year to year to year, we saw it from 2022 to 2023 this year with Quinn. You can expect a similar style jump from 23 to 24 next year, despite the increase in competitiveness in the performance. Quinn Ewers right now is, in that conversation for top 1, top 2, top 3 quarterback in the SEC, a good year and a friendly offense that Sarkisian runs. It's fair to think he would be in that conversation for an all-SEC bid next year. I don't know. Kelvin Banks certainly in that conversation. I'd love to personally see what Cam Williams can do for a full season of games as well if he wins that right tackle spot. But I think right now Texas is kind of in that position of figuring out who's going to be their guys on both sides of the ball. I do hope, that the Texas cornerback duo takes a big step forward, because that would change the trajectory and confidence that I have in the Texas defense for 2024 as well.
The only other person that I think I wrote down for sure that I think if they find the right person that plays alongside of him, if it's David Benda that's back, is Anthony Hill.
Yep.
He has – so when you – the difference between being an all Big 12 first-team guy and an all-SEC first-team guy is all SEC first-team guys, they tend to go in the first and second round of the NFL draft. Maybe they slip to the third round. Okay, the Big 12, some of those guys that are first-team, they aren't drafted. Okay, and so I think of it this way. I think that you look at guys that have that NFL level potential: Ewers, Banks, Anthony Hill, maybe a Jahdae Barron if he comes back at star because he's got so much experience. Those would be my guys.
Hey, guys, I was just looking while you were answering that question. Fox Sports also has it way too early, top 25. Texas number 3. Michigan is 1, Georgia 2, Texas 3, Alabama 4, Oregon 5. So
there's a lot of expectations on this program right now. A lot.
What do they call that? Rat poison?
Yeah, it is a little rat poison. I think Texas better have their head down, focused in this offseason. Because they got a lot, to CJ's point, they've got a lot of starts to replace. They've got a lot of work ahead of them. So any kind of thought process of taking your eye off the ball right now, not what they need to be doing.
Yeah, I would say the only number that should be in that locker room right now was the final score of that Washington-Texas game that Texas is focusing on. That should be all the motivation that you need moving into, the 2024 season, the offseason ahead is, Texas got close, but there's still a lot of work left to be done before the ultimate goal is achieved. And, we saw what Michigan did yesterday. There's a step or two from what Texas put on the field to what we saw Michigan win with last night, and what was I consider a very dominating fashion.
Bobby, you're muted.
Before we go, I need to mention Texas made a new scholarship offer yesterday. Keelan Deere is a running back out of Quitman, Mississippi. It's kind of central Mississippi, a little closer to the Alabama line. But he's a running back, 6'1", 205, 210 pounds. He is one of a very few number of running backs that Tashard Choice has offered in this recruiting cycle. That is a big news. The other one that we're watching at running back right now for 2025 is Jordan Davison out of Santa Ana Mater Dei, who we believe will be in on the January 20th recruiting weekend, thinking that Texas has a real good shot there. But a name to watch now, Akeelan Deere out of Quitman, Mississippi, and he's a really, I watched him this morning, very, very talented running back.
Okay, guys, we're going to close with this. Kabir Hussein says, we face the last 3 national champions this upcoming season. What do you think about that?
That's crazy.
I think we say welcome to the SEC.
Well, they played the 3 other playoff teams in a span of about 15 or 16 games. So that's just, luck of scheduling and obviously the league in which you're entering. So
why am I blanking on? I know Georgia and Michigan. Who's the third one?
Alabama won in 2020.
Yeah, but Texas doesn't play Alabama this year.
Oh, well, because Georgia went back to back.
Georgia too. Okay, I got you. I thought it was individual programs, but you're talking about the last 3 national champs.
That's good. That's good stat to push a narrative with. I like it.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that threw me for a loop as well there for a second. All right, Bobby, before we get out of here, tell folks what they can expect later today right here on Texas Football.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned Akeelan Deere just a minute ago. CJ and I have a recruiting breakdown today around noon. We're going to get to that, talk a little bit about portal recruiting. By the way, that's hot and heavy right now, as is attrition that we're still concerned about somewhat. Then also tonight we have the live stream. CJ, Rod Babers, Aaron Hogan hosting that for us in the evening. Come back and there'll probably be some more news that breaks later today.
Hey, real quick, David, we were talking about possible all SEC. David Williams has a good answer. Bert Auburn.
Yep. Yeah, especially since the Alabama kicker's gone.
Yeah.
Will Riker is probably the I think they think he's going to be the first kicker taken in the draft. So we'll see.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Coffee and Football. We want to thank all of you for tuning in. Thank you for all of the super chats. Got to thank Manscaped, of course, for being a sponsor of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow morning. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and then ring the bell so you're notified anytime and every time a video is posted right here on Texas Football. So for CJ Vogel and Bobby Burton, I'm Blake Monroe, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Hook up.